Okay, I was born on a farm nearby Hilliard, and I was born at the farmhouse. At that time in our life, the doctors came out to your home and made their visits. We seldom went to the doctor. So all of us kids delivered there in the house. And from there we grew and started school. Brothers and sisters went to a little school over by Grace Chapel. For a good many years we got to school by sled or walking. And when I started school, I had a bus that was pulled by horses to the schoolhouse, and rode it almost the first year until one day when the driver pulled out on the highway and a Model T Ford came down over the hill and knocked the bus all to pieces. All of us kids was off of it anyway. But anyway, they started motorized buses at that point in time. And the bus driver, though, was a good guy. I thought about him the other day, because one of the horses that used to pull me to school, my dad bought, worked as a farm horse, and also he was kind of a comedian type guy, and always joking with you and everything. So one day, we was going into Bahia in there. He lived just a little ways out of Bahia, and my dad said, well, we better stop and pick up John Gray. He was going to town. So I was sitting in the front seat with my dad, and Johnny Gray got in and said, you better be good, all jerking out in your tail, and that got me all excited, and I jumped over the front seat, and my foot hit the basket of eggs, and we maced a lot of those before we got to the store. But my dad didn't get mad at me because it was his fault for asking John Gray to get in the car. So anyway, it was all pretty simple life back then, because our life was built really around school or church. And anytime there was a church meeting, there was always some of us there. Usually on Thursday nights was prayer meeting. We used to walk down the road, well, I suppose about 4 miles to church if nobody's going to drive a car. And then the Sunday nights they always had a Christian Endeavor, which us kids all had to go to. And about every other Sunday night they have preaching services, which then our folks would go. But really at home, since we had no electricity and kerosene lamps, eventually got a gasoline light. Seemed like we were more anxious to go to church because they had brighter lights there than they did at home. But we enjoyed farm life. There was never a lack of food. Even in the Depression of 29 and 30, we had plenty of food for everybody, because we had a big garden, and always butchered about 7 hogs and a beef cattle. We usually butcher 1 beef each year. So that took care of most of our basic home life. On Sunday afternoons, you know, today we watch TV and everything, but on Sunday afternoons, us kids, of course, there's 6 of us, so we always had some guys, some friends that wanted to come over. And usually we played softball or baseball about every Sunday afternoon out in the horse pasture, and had about enough kids for 2 teams, it seems like, every time. Then in the winter time, if we got a big rain, the water froze all across the driveway out in front of our house. So I think half of Bahia would come down there and do ice skating. So it was all, you know, homemade games, because we really didn't have the skates they have today. So you tried to find an old pair of skates that you put on your feet or skated on your shoes all the time. And if you couldn't skate, then you get a tin can and a couple of sticks and play tin can on the ice and have goals which way we're going to move. so on. So it's all a pretty simple life. I guess as kids tried to get into mischief once in a while. I know my brother Bus and I, once in the afternoon, thought we'd have a race, and it took about 10 years before we get a bicycle, even though our neighbor kids had bicycles, we could never afford one. So we finally found one for $2, and Bus and I decided we'd have a race. He'd ride Old Nellie, which was the horse that we bought from Johnny Gray, and the bicycle, and we raced back the lane to the pasture field. And I think we no more got started till I was going so fast the bicycle went up in the air and I fell off. He kept going on the horse, so I guess the horse won. But there were silly things like that you did growing up. And of course, we didn't have a tractor, so when we go over to the neighbors a lot of times or to Grandma's house, we'd drive an old buggy with a horse on to do chores over there, because we always had some cattle there we had to feed and water. And when we watered, we had to carry the water from the well out to a tank and so on. The same way with the hogs that we had. We never had what was running water really. We pumped water from the house pump out to the barn tank, and then we dip in that tank to carry water out to the hog barns and other places. And the water tank would fill up in the wintertime with ice so much that there's always such little space. So one of us kids always had to keep pumping water while the horses was let out to drink, or whether when the cows were let out, we always had to keep pumping water, which again I always thought it'd be so great to have a little gas engine that would do all the pumping. But we couldn't afford a gas engine. My dad didn't think, and he had all us kids around, so why have a gas engine if he had kids to work? And so we pumped water by hand for a good many years. Towards the end, then of course electricity came in, and lo and behold, I came home again, and Dad had the pump set up with electric pump, which I never thought we would have, which was great for all the livestock, but we still had to carry water about half a mile to the hog houses to feed and water the sows with the little pigs. So on, of course, that's the same thing over at Grandma's house, because we had a bunch of sheep and cattle over there. They had to have water carried to the barn in the wintertime. So wintertime was rough, I thought, in farming, and carrying water made sure all the animals got water. And the exciting things there, I guess, was when we let the horses out one morning, and we'd already got the cows milked, and Libby, my sister, always liked to follow me around on the farm, so we had 2 little wagons, and the horses were drinking water, and we thought, well, I did. She wasn't thinking. But I thought I could pedal my bicycle across there before the horses get through drinking enough water, because they always like to run. We knew that. They always like to run around the barnyard for a while before they went back in the barn. And I made it to the barn door, but my sister was too slow on her wagon, and one of the horses started running, and I guess didn't see us kids, or got excited too, and tried to jump over Libby, and her back leg caught her right on the shoulder, and her shoulder was broken. So we had to call Dr. Duke, and Dr. Duke was our doctor. We always said, Dr. Duke makes you puke. But he always came out, and we called him right away, and he said, sure enough, I'll be right there. He put her on the kitchen table and set her arm and wrapped it up, and she was good as new again. So I don't know, that was some of the simple things, I guess, we had. As far as school is concerned, of course, at that time we had all 12 grades, and we had 6 teachers that done all the teaching. First and second grade was together, and we sat one side of the room with a first grader, and on the other side, second grade, and the teacher would rotate reading from one class to the other class. Never thought any different. I suppose there was about 40 of us kids, maybe 30 or 40 in the room. And Winifred Bottom was my first grade teacher. And she was a little sweetheart teacher. She was probably around 40, which I thought was old at that point in time, changed my mind. But I hated school. I tried to do like Tommy Wiley did, play sick in the mornings. But my mom and dad forced me to go to school. And Winifred was so nice that one day she called me up in front of the room and said what a nice little student I was and everything. And if I would promise that I wanted to go to school, she'd give me a pencil box. So the next day she had me a pencil box. And from there on I decided I did like school and went to school. So she was my first grade teacher. And then I went to third and fourth grade, and I was going to, or Gladys McMinn. Gladys McMinn was, they were all little maids really at that point in time. Gladys McMinn taught third and fourth grades, and fifth and sixth grade was taught by Winter Moody, another old maid, probably around 40 years old. And then we got the seventh and eighth grade, and that's when we had our first male teacher. His name was Sir Baker. We called the rubber hose shaker because he used to, if you didn't behave yourself, you got the rubber hose used on you. And nobody ever said anything about it. Our parents, which none of us kids ever really got whipped by Sir Baker. I know a lot of the kids did. But if we had, I'm sure my mom and dad probably give us another paddling for being a bad kid. And from the eighth grade, we went into high school, and there we had 3 teachers to teach all the 4 grades in high school, and those subjects were about the same, I think, in all the high schools back then. We had mathematics and geography, history, physics, and Latin was the basic course. Other than regular English, we had the English composition and English itself, and we used to have tests county-wide and have to go to Marysville on a Saturday to take tests. And the one I went to when I was a sophomore was Latin, and I ranked second in the county in the usage of Latin words and so on and so forth. But the one teacher was a superintendent, and he taught physics and a couple other courses, and the other teachers taught the English. We did have manual training. But usually manual training was only for a half a year, because you had to take another course to get all your different courses in during that period of time. And from there, we started our first year at Ohio State, and went 1 year, and I didn't go till January because fall we had to get the corn husked out and everything. And my dad and I was the only ones that was home on the farm at that time because my brother Charles started farming away from home, and my brother Leland was going to be a minister, so he wasn't at home. So I left my dad and I. So I didn't go to school until Ohio State till in January, and I went 2 quarters, I think it was 38, and then went back to school again in 39 for the 39 and 42 quarters, and then I was drafted into service in the Army in 41, and spent 5 years plus in the regular Army there, and went to 7 different countries. My folks did not want me to go to service, and I've often wondered, of course, that was a breakdown of our home life bad, because my dad had his first stroke. He couldn't find anymore, and my mother tried to operate the farm, run it out. Things kind of went to pot at that point in time. When I came home from service, why they had, which was okay, they had sold all the livestock, and there was 1 horse left, and I think we sold a couple of cows, and they kept the tractor, but the neighbor rented out the farm. So when I came over from service, I started back to school. I think the first year I tried to farm again with moving from the Army, and I don't know how many quarters I went that first year again, but then my idea, my goal was to come back and go into veterinary medicine, but I never was accepted. I was accepted, they said, by the college, but then I got a letter later saying I wasn't accepted, and I never checked on it because I thought getting too old to keep going to school all the time, so I changed to become a county agent, which is what I majored in agriculture, and my first job was a 4-H agent in Glades County in 1948. So I was an extension for about 3 years and got a job to go with production credit, and in 51, and was county manager in Allen County for a couple of years, and the fellow was in Glades County passed away, so Bob Henderson, the president, transferred me back to Wapak, and I became county manager there for a couple of years, and then the association kept growing, so he made me assistant manager, and in 1966 I was made manager or president of the Production Credit Association for the 6-county area of Glades, Allen, Mercer, Shelby, Van Wert, and Logan counties. And we had some very good years at that point in time because agriculture was growing and the financing was needed. And at one time we had over 40 employees in the 6 counties working for production credit. But in 1984, agriculture came to a bad spot in production and farming as far as buying land and so forth. Land became cheaper, and people had bought so much before. $3,000 an acre, the land reduced itself down to about $1,000 an acre, which started a burden on farmers, and it was 1984 then that I was 65, and that was the year that I had to retire based on rules and regulations from the bank in Louisville. But a good experience over the years, had opportunities not only in local production credit but also in going to the bank in Louisville, which I never did, because I didn't want to move away from the family, and I have been sorry that I did not move away to Louisville because a lot of those folks were eventually fired from the job down there, and I was able to maintain my job in Glades County until retirement age, which was pretty good at that point in time because so many of the presidents were fired and left the organization for one reason or the other. So that, unless I go into now the rearing of our little children, which came along at a point in time, which was nice because we had, it was amazing. We went to Glades County, Walmart in 1948. It was so difficult to find a place to live, and we looked and finally found a rented home in Walpole, and from a farmer that decided he'd keep on farming. But after about a year's time, he decided he'd retire and move into town. So then we had to look again, and we couldn't find anything at all in Walpole to rent. So one of the farmers had the home out of St. John's, which we moved to, and I think that's where we started having the family, with Margene coming along, and the next year Janie, and while we were out on the farm there at St. John's, we thought of different ways of making money. We were still working in extension, and I'd had, of course, some poultry and so on, so we had a little brewery house on the farm, and we bought about 100 broilers in the spring of the year, and got a brooder stove and raised those until they were about 6 weeks to 2 months old, and they weighed around 2.5 to 3 pounds. And we put a sign up down in the lane where we lived that we had broilers for sale. And on weekends, a lot of people come out from Indian Lake to buy broilers, and on Saturdays, Joanna and I would be killing chickens. We'd have chickens flopping around all over the place. We'd dress them, and people take them back to Indian Lake. And there were some stores in Walpock, bought a few at that point in time. So it was an interesting period of time of working both jobs in the extension service and farming. And then we moved back into town after a period of time and lived there again for a while and decided to buy a farm. I think Tommy was born in Walpock, and then we bought 40 acres out by Buckland to go back into farming again, and we had everything out there. I mean, I think Jackie came along out there, and then we had chickens and hogs and sheep and an old John Deere tractor that we tried to farm the place with, and we bought the equipment. We bought the farm, and we had a corn planter that when you turned the corners, it would not turn. And all we got was a bunch of dirt underneath, so I had to go back, lift it up. It made many bad words come out of my mouth because I didn't know how to fix it. So finally I took the wheels off and fit it onto the back of the tractor and used it that way. But when someone like my boss, Bob Henderson, and one of the co-workers came out to the farm to see the land and everything, it worked out there's more corn on top of the ground than there was in the ground used to the corn planter. But we got by. We lived out there, I think, about 4 years. And Mom didn't like that out there too well. Of course, at that point in time, too, I hadn't realized that I was never out of the Army. And a draft came along for the Korean War, which I was called up and had to go 4 days again for another physical. And passed the physical, but was never called into service because the officer that called us up said, well, if you get involved in the Army back in Lima, then we probably won't call you up for a while. So the group of officers formed a group to study in Lima, and we met every Monday night. Then in the summertime, every 2 weeks we had to go to camp somewhere. So that kind of upset Mrs. Wiley because she had to be left alone for 2 weeks, which was lonely, and being out in the country like that with 3 or 4 kids, it was pretty rough on her part. So eventually we sold out 40 acres after about 3 years, 4 years. We sold it and moved back into town, and then eventually built our house on Steinball Drive and lived a total of over 60 years in Walpock, Canada, and had a lot of friends there and enjoyed the lifestyle and so on until 2006, of course. That's when I had the valve replacement and changed my health styles and so on and so forth, and we moved to Columbus. What have I forgotten?